Hello, my name is Eduardo Silva, and this threat assessment is about the role of social media in increasing right-wing extremism in Canada. In Canada, ITAC is the only federal organization tasked to analyze terrorism threat. At this point, according to ITAC, Canada's current level of terrorism threat is medium, meaning that a violent act of terrorism could occur at any time. However, the right-wing extremist group's threat can be considered high due to the increment of followers and the fast recruitment through social media. According to ISD, the Institute of Strategic Dialogue, which presented a report recently called An Online Environmental Scan of Right-Wing Extremism in Canada. Their definition of RWE is a loose movement characterized by a racially, ethnically, and sexually defined nationalism. This nationalism is often framed in terms of white power and is grounded in xenophobic and exclusionary understandings of the perceived threats posed by such groups as non-whites, Jews, immigrants, homosexuals, and feminists. The primary question we wanted to answer was, what is the scale of RWE presence online in Canada? But also we got two more questions during this assessment, as do different types of RWE groups operate on different social media platforms? And what are the drivers of RWE activity online? Before answering those questions, first, let's go back to an event that happened early this year. Many of us know that on January 6th, a mob of right-wing extremists stormed into the US Capitol in an attempt to overturn the 2020 election results. The attack was deliberate, with right-wing extremist groups openly planning on social media platforms for weeks prior to the riot. However, even before rioters began discussing the attack in public forums, there were clues as to what was to come. Donald Trump's rhetoric and policies normalized right-wing extremism, which has been festering online since his inauguration in 2016. The lack of monitoring by large social media companies served to facilitate the spread of right-wing extremism and recruitment into militia groups such as the Proud Boys, for example. This encouraged people to become entrenched in their beliefs and increasingly radicalized. Okay, so according to the Institute for Strategic Dialogue, the ISD that I mentioned before, there are 9 categories of right-wing extremism. So we can see the skinhead, the white supremacists, the anti-Muslims, alt-right, manosphere, anti-authority, lone actors, um, ideologues and gurus, and neo-Nazis. The principal terrorist threat to Canada and Canadian interests is posed by individuals or groups inspired by violent ideologies and terrorist groups such Daesh or Al Qaeda. But also at the same time, Canada continues to face threats from individuals inspired to commit violence based on other forms of extremism. For example, right-wing extremists individuals who support terrorist groups as Hezbollah, and extremists who support violent means to establish an independent state within India, for example. In 2019, Kenya added two right-wing extremist groups to its list of terrorist entities. One was the Blood and Honor, and the other one was the Combat 18. Proud Boys, however, was added in February of this year. So let's talk about Proud Boys a little bit. According to Public Safety Canada, the Proud Boys is a semi-autonomous group located in the United States, Canada, and internationally. The group and its members have openly encouraged, planned, and conducted violent activities against those they perceive to be opposed to their ideology and political beliefs. The group, for example, regularly attends Black Lives Matter protests as counter-protesters. They often engage in violence targeting Black Lives Matter supporters. So the leader, for example, the leader of the Proud Boys was arrested 2 days before the insurrection in the United States. So to apprehend individuals who were planning to travel to Washington, D.C. with the intentions to cause violence. So the acts of terrorism committed by the far right have increased by 320% over the past 5 years. Supported by an increasingly connected and internationalist community of right-wing extremism, Canada has not been isolated from this trend, and in recent years the number of hate groups operating in the country has tripled. For example, the right-wing extremist activity surged in Atlantic Canada in 2016 and then climbed higher each consecutive year, according to the University of New Brunswick sociologist David Hoffman. Also, researchers found 29 right-wing extremist groups active in the region, such as the Northern Guard, which Hoffman described as an American-style militia movement. The Canadian anti-hate network calls Northern Guard an anti-Muslim hate group. So probably some of you remember that in June 2014, Justin Burke shot and killed 3 RCMP officers and injured 2 others in Moncton, New Brunswick. Or probably you remember that in January 2017, Alexander Bissonnette shot and killed 6 individuals and injured 19 more at the Islamic Center of Quebec City. You could probably remember also the event attack that resulted in 10 people's deaths back in April 2018, carried out by Alec Minashian. So where he identified himself part of an incel movement, meaning involuntarily celibate. So it was an online subculture where men bemoan their lack of sexual success and they vent misogynistic views. And last year in January, former Canadian Armed Forces reservist Patrick Matthews was arrested with 2 other men. The trio were suspected members of the Base, which is a violent neo-Nazi organization, and had been planning an attack in Richmond, Virginia, with the aim to cause chaos and accelerating the initiation of a civil war. So, for instance, what we want to mention here is that the common denominator of these attackers are the active presence in social media. Okay, so a research led by the United Kingdom-based Institute for Strategic Dialogue, ISD, and published just recently, found a variety of Canadian right-wing extremist communities across online platforms, including Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Iron March, Faces, 4chan, and Gab. There were like 6,660 right-wing extremist channels, pages, groups, and accounts that they were identified within 7 social media platforms in Canada. ISD posted the number of Canadian RWE Twitter users. So there were like 1,669,000 users. But what is more interesting is the amount of Canadian users engaging in RWE conversations. They were 6,352. So imagine how many out of the 6,352 users could also be engaged in terrorist activities or planning on engaging this type of activities. Here's a network map of the 6,352 Twitter users who had sent a right-wing extremist message in 2019. Also, I want to mention that in addition, a new research report by the Department of National Defense suggests that the longer the COVID pandemic rages, the stronger right-wing extremism and other threats in Canada and around the world are likely to become. Researchers from the Ontario Tech University, Michigan State University, and the University of New Brunswick investigated the presence of RWE subgroups by social media. Here is an example of the subgroups of ethno-nationalist, anti-Muslim, white supremacists, manosphere, etc., and their presence on each social media platform. There are more outlying platforms. White supremacist groups are more prevalent, accounting for 100% of Canadian users identified on Faces Forged, and 72% of Canadian users identified on Iron March, and 40% of Canadian users identified on Gab. In the assessment, we found that terrorist and extremist groups actively try to recruit new members to join their causes in a variety of ways, and the internet and social media have been actually a powerful tool in their arsenal, especially when trying to influence young people to their cause. Terrorist and extremist groups and their supporters use websites and social media platforms to share propaganda, spread disinformation and misinformation, and to foster a sense of community to all the supporters, which serves to amplify their influence. They use this to share propaganda and to become friends with people who seem to display interest in what they are thinking, doing, and saying. Newcomers might become friends, for example, with several different extremists online. They come to feel that they are part of a community with these extremist friends online, and to feel like these new online friends are real friends. They might not realize that the extremists don't like them for who they are, but rather they are just trying to take advantage of them to achieve those goals of the extremist groups. So Or social media bans, another part of our assessment found that actors are creating additional obstacles for security and intelligence community. This is key, but also that social media bans do nothing to reduce the risk of violence by current members. By forcing these right-wing groups onto platforms such Signal, Telegram, Gap, the ban has effectively created an echo chamber in which members will never encounter opposing opinions that may have a moderate influence. Perhaps certain right-wing groups are empowered by bans from mainstream social media platforms such Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. These bans are seen as evidence that their voice is simply too powerful to be exposed to the general public. And thus they had to be silenced by these large corporations or the government. Recommendations. I recommend to invest in law enforcement services, foreign intelligence, cybersecurity, and dissemination tools. Also to invest in community engagement and developing outreach plans to reduce tension and strengthen the sense of identity, morale, and unity within the community. But another option or another recommendation is to revert back to the norm and allow these extreme perspectives back into mainstream platforms where they can continue in the public eye. This option may facilitate a healthier flow of reasonable ideas and allow law enforcement to track potential threats. It would also enable these radical groups the opportunity to gain greater following. Governments, social media companies, and experts on right-wing extremism must work together in order to find better long-term solutions to fight the spread of right-wing extremism online. Here are some references that we use to do this assessment. And I want to thank you, but I also want to finish by saying that nature doesn't care about your race, gender, or religion. That is all man-made. Nature just cares about healthy organisms, and your precious ethnic features are expendable to that goal. So the moment that you let go of that racist identity and relax onto humanity, all your problems go away. Thank you again.